Hey everybody, it's Scott and welcome to this week's episode of Strength and Health TV. This week I want to talk about training the lower back, the glutes and the hamstrings, or what's often referred to as the posterior chain, and I want to show a few of my favorite exercises that we use in here at my training center on a fairly regular basis. Now with training the lower back, the glutes and the hamstrings, what we're looking at is building strength in order to supplement some of our heavy barbell lifts as well as some of the movements that athletes make in training performance and competition. So when we're talking about building up the glutes, the lower back and the hamstrings, their posterior chain, we want to look at how this helps to benefit movements like the squat, like the deadlift, and if you're a weightlifter, it'd help your snatch or clean and jerk. If you're an athlete, these are the muscles that have a direct impact on your sprinting, on your jumping, and your ability to produce power and force as you're training and competing. I believe that these muscles are very, very important, and I still find that even though it's been shown how important these muscles are for strength, speed, performance, and power enhancement, it's still crazy at how many people are weak in these areas. I was down, one of my powerlifters does physical therapy down at Georgia Tech, and I was talking to a physical therapist, the director of the clinic down there, and we were talking about injuries and athletes and things of that nature, and one of the things that he said is these athletes come in, these are high-level athletes that have weak hamstrings, a lot of hamstring injuries, and it just shows that what's going on isn't in the weight rooms isn't building those muscles. There's not a lot of direct work being put onto those muscles, and oftentimes from the programming that I see, it's just left up to things like squats and front squats and deadlifts to build those muscles. I don't hear people talking about a lot of direct hamstring work, a lot of direct lower back work, and often you just hear people say, well, deadlifting builds the back. Well, it does, but you're using a bunch of other muscles that tend to take over for the weakest links. So if you've got strong legs, if you've got a strong upper back, the lower back might be the limiting factor in the deadlift, so you're only going to be able to lift what your lower back's capable of supporting in that movement. Same with squatting. If the lower back's the weakest link, that's what's going to limit your ability to do that movement. To give you kind of a case in point, I was working with an outside linebacker from Georgia Southern many years ago. He came to me for pro day preparation, and he weighed about 236 pounds. He had a 29-inch vertical jump. He had a 535 parallel squat. He had a, not that these numbers really matter, but he had a 335 bench, and he had a 4.85 second 40-yard dash. So these are some of the things that they look at when at the pro day, specifically his 40-yard dash and his vertical out of those exercises or those lifts that I just referred to. But anyway, our first workout together, I had him doing some kettlebell swings with a 24-kilo bell. Now this guy was big, he was jacked, he was 236 pounds, really muscular, really strong, powerful, but his lower back locked up on him during kettlebell swings. So we started looking at movements like reverse hypers, glute hams. He was really, really weak. So we really put a lot of emphasis on those three movements in addition to his squatting, his deadlifting, and his jump training and things like that. But we really put a lot of volume into the glute hams, the reverse hypers, and the kettlebell swings, which is what I'm going to show today. And after about 6 to 8 weeks of training, his vertical was at 39.5 inches. It's a 10.5 inch improvement from where I pre-tested him. His parallel squat went from 535 to 600. His bench went from 335 to 405, and his 40 went from a 4.85 down to a 4.60. So he took a little over 0.2 of a second off his 40. Now, I'm not saying that in 6 weeks I made him that much better. What I'm saying is that with that weak of a lower back, that was inhibiting his performance in those movements. Nobody's going to put 10 inches on their vertical in 6 to 8 weeks. It's just not going to happen. I mean, if 29 was his true vertical, we'd probably put a few inches on that jump, through strength power training. But because he went up 10.5 inches, that just showed me, that coupled with the fact that his lower back locked up on him during our first training session, that just showed me that the lower back was his limiting factor. And by putting a lot of work on that weak muscle, it allowed him to get better across the board in all those movements. So training the posterior chain is very, very important. Unfortunately, it's still very overlooked. In my last video, I talked about training the neck, which is hugely important. I'm a big fan of the work of Louis Simmons, and Louis always talks about how these athletes, these coaches, they never train the top of the spine and the bottom of the spine. So that's the neck and the lower back. And I really think that a lot of time should be spent on these muscles, particularly if that's a weak point in your athletes and your lifters. So one of my favorite books is The Science and Practice of Strength Training by Vladimir Zatsiorsky, and he talks about how the great weightlifter Vasily Alexeyev, how he would do inverse curls, which is basically a weighted back extension, how he would do inverse curls for the lower back, the glutes, and the hamstrings with a lot of weight, and he did a tremendous amount of work, particularly in the 5 to 8 repetition range according to his training logs that are shown in the book. About 24% of his total volume was put into that 5 to 8 rep range on the inverse curl. So it's a very important muscle group for weightlifters, for powerlifters, and athletes alike, and just for general health. If you're trying to get stronger and be healthier, a lot of people have lower back problems. These movements are fantastic for it, and I'm going to talk about why here in a second. So what I want to do is show 3 of my favorite movements that we use here on a regular basis. It's the glute hamstring raise, the reverse hyper, and a kettlebell swing, a variation of the kettlebell swing. By now, I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys know about kettlebell swings. You've seen one-handed swings, two-handed swings, kettlebell snatches, and all kinds of other kettlebell movements. So I just want to show a variation that we use for virtual force development and power output, which has been very successful with a lot of my athletes. So we're going to look at those today here and then wrap it up. So let's get into it. So the first thing that I want to look at is the glute ham raise. Now obviously you need a dedicated glute ham bench, and these are often performed with a back extension, but the way that I like to do them is taking out the back extension part of the movement and just focusing on the knee flexion or the hamstring curl. When I was up in Columbus, the last couple of visits that I made up there to Westside Barbell, Louis Simmons has developed a machine called the inverse curl, which I think is even more superior than the glute ham raise for working the hamstrings, because just doing a few sets of 5, I'd never felt my hamstrings like I did after doing those movements. But I did, one of my lifters who's got some issues with her knees, she was not able to use the inverse curl because you do actually place your knees on top of a pad, whereas with the glute ham raise, you rest your thighs on top of the pad. So if you do have knee issues, you might not be able to use the inverse curl movement, but the glute ham is a great substitute if you do them properly. Now you want to make sure that the back of the bench is set far enough up that your thighs don't slide down the pad when you're doing this to make the movement easier. So you really want to focus again on that knee flexion. So to do the glute ham raise, put your thighs up on top of the pad with your knees a few inches behind the rounded pad. Lock those knees out, and you're going to drive your toes into the toe plate as you curl back, flexing the hamstrings. So you want to squeeze everything tight, brace, pull yourself up, and then take it down. And that's how we perform the glute ham raise. Like I said, sometimes people throw a lower back extension in there. I don't think it's necessarily wrong. I just like to use other movements targeting the lower back and really focus on the hamstrings and glutes with this variation. You're still working the spinal erectors, it's just isometric. Some of the things we do, we'll also put a band on the front of the bench, throw it out over the neck for a little bit of resistance. It really gives you a lot of contraction, at the peak of the movement. Sometimes we'll hold weights at the chest. Sometimes we'll do a combination of each. So that's the glute ham raise. The second exercise is the reverse hyperextension. This is a machine that is patented by Louis Simmons from Westside Barbell. The variation that I have is the Ultra Supreme reverse hyper. It's got straps and it's got the roller pendulum attachment. Some of the models have a table that can tilt in various directions to overload various parts of the posterior chain that you're trying to work. There's one that's a dual pendulum where you can work each leg independently of itself. There's a leverage reverse hyper with a bent pendulum, so it hits the lower back tremendously. I really enjoyed that machine, getting to use it when I was up there. So again, there's about 5 or 6, I think, different variations of the reverse hyper on the market. But this is one of the more basic ones, using the strap here. Now when you do the reverse hyper, you don't want to get crazy and let the machine just swing your legs around, but you do want to relax a little bit on the downswing, because the pendulum will pull the legs underneath the bench. It'll allow your sacrum to rotate, your tailbone to rotate, and that'll decompress your spine. So that's where there's a bit of a therapeutic advantage on the reverse hyper. Then when you lift, you want to make sure that you extend your neck and your upper back as you raise your legs up to get a full contraction through the lower back and the glutes. And then again, relax, lower the weight. Don't just go dead and let the pendulum swing down, but lower the weight under some control, but allow those legs to swing under the face, and that again will rotate the sacrum, decompressing the lumbar spine. So I'll show a few reps of the reverse hyper. that movement to make sure that you're extending the upper back and the neck on the lift, and that you're relaxing, lowering the weight under control, but allowing the pendulum to pull your legs under the bench, decompressing the lumbar spine. We do these multiple times a week, usually about 3 to 4 times a week. It's great for back strength, it's great for lower back health. And then the last of the movements that I want to go over today is a variation that I really like on the kettlebell swing. What we actually do here, and I got this from the Diesel Crew guys, is we take a jump stretch style band here. We usually use a light band, and you choke it around the handle of your kettlebell like this. And then you're going to stand on the end of the band, and as you swing that kettlebell up, the band tension is going to swing the bell down a lot faster than just gravity, like when you're doing a normal kettlebell swing. And what that does is it creates virtual force development, impacting the posterior chain, the lower back, the glutes, the hamstrings, so that your muscles are storing and absorbing a lot more force than if you were just doing a kettlebell swing by itself. This is great for power athletes. I've been using this a lot with my swimmers, tennis player, a lot of my power lifters. I've used this in the past with my football players, and this is a great accessory exercise for power development. So again, what you do after choking the band onto the handle of the kettlebell, just stand on the band, get in your normal kettlebell swing stance, and then you're just going to do your kettlebell swings driving hard with the hips, but now that band's going to pull the kettlebell back really hard. All right? And that's the two-handed kettlebell swing with the band attached. So those are just a few of the movements that I've been using lately with my athletes, with my lifters here in the gym, and we've seen a lot of success, a lot of great carryover with these movements to our bigger lifts and to sport performance. So hopefully this has inspired you to try some of these movements. Obviously, if you're going to do the reverse hyper in the glute ham, you're going to need those dedicated benches. There's nothing wrong with doing good mornings, doing Romanian deadlifts, doing deadlift squats, all those other movements we use in our programming here. These are just some of the exercises, the accessory exercises that we do on a fairly regular basis that has helped our squatting, our deadlifting, and our sport performance. So hopefully you enjoyed this week's episode. Hopefully it's giving you some things to consider implementing into your training program. And until next week, stay strong and stay healthy.